Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. It's time for another breakdown, and this time there was only one choice. Takerufuji, the shocking Yusho winner at Haru 2024.
Surprise, motherfucker.
Takeru had an unheard of ascension through the ranks. After barnstorming the bottom 3 divisions, he spent 4 tournaments in Makushita before rising to Juryo. Normally progress slows as you get higher, not just in sumo but in any competitive environment with a ranking system. Takerufuji, however, manhandled the Sekitori, the guys who get paid to just wrestle, posting back-to-back 13-2 records and winning consecutive championships in sumo's top 2 divisions. Now, we should be clear about something. I called him the shocking winner because, on paper, this sort of thing isn't supposed to happen. He was the first guy in the 6 basho per year era to win his first tournament in the top division. In fact, the last time it happened was at the start of World War I, another 40 plus years before the 6 basho era started. He took 4 whacks at Makushita but couldn't win 7 straight matches in any of those attempts, yet started 9-0 in Juryo and 11-0 in Makuuchi. It defies logic. Yet, if you watched his matches, this wasn't the world's greatest Cinderella story riding a streak of good work and good luck to possibly the most remarkable achievement sumo's ever seen. Takerufuji absolutely dominated his opposition. That leaves us with 2 core questions. 1. How did he do it? More specifically, how did he lose to guys over 4 tournaments in 2023 who were nowhere near the level of those he steamrolled in March? 2. Should we have seen it coming? Not even necessarily to the degree that we'd expect him to win these Yushos, but should we have at least considered him a legitimate contender in that first top division tournament? We don't have access to his fights in divisions 4, 5, or 6, but he only lost once and he probably could have won a lot of those matches one-handed. So first, we'll go through his Makushita losses. There were only 5 of these, but his 23-5 record is, in fact, a worse winning percentage than his Makuuchi and Juryo winning percentage. Therefore, we'll get as deep as we need to and figure out how he managed to never run the table in the 3rd division. This was Takerufuji's very first Makushita match. Takeru comes in low, keeping his arms in to land his hands on Toseryu's ribs. I'm gonna mess that up, I'm sorry. Toseryu reaches in on the right. This puts Takeru in a position where, on his left, he's trying to push while also pinching off an attempt on his belt. At the same time, he shoves high with his right hand. Toseryu leans way in to resist the push so he doesn't get blasted out, and Takerufuji still has to work. He gets his left hand in under the armpit and drives. However, his right hand came off of Toseryu's jaw, so it's not adding to the push. This is where the fight goes wrong. Toseryu's left hand is on Takerufuji's ribs, and Takeru brings his right arm down to clamp it. That's pretty normal. However, it doesn't offer a lot of control over Toseryu's body. In fact, when Toseryu steps back and left and gets his right hand on Takerufuji's head to pull him down, that right arm becomes another point of leverage for Toseryu to push on. Takeru keeps charging to try and get the push out before he falls, but Toseryu manages to escape and win. One thing we talked about in the Onosato breakdown is the importance of keeping one arm on your opponent's ribs, if not all the way around their back, when pushing in order to prevent exactly this kind of escape. If Takeru wanted to get his right arm down and use it for control, that arm placement is the kind of tactic that might have helped. But he won out the rest of the basho and finished 6-1, so he must have figured something out, right? Put a pin in that. We'll talk about his wins later. This is the first match of the following basho against veteran and ex-Makuuchi wrestler Akiseyama. Takerufuji charges in with hands in pushing position, just like against Toseryu. Akiseyama is a big boy, they don't call him Sexyama for nothing. So he's able to absorb the charge without getting pushed back too much. Takerufuji is fully pushing, not trying to control his opponent's hands, so Akiseyama gets those hands on Takerufuji's head. If you want to see some of the finer details of sumo, let's back up and look at this chain of events. First, Akiseyama uses his forearms to block Takeru's arms. Yes, he reaches in, but when guys commit to that low reach for the belt, their arms stay straight. His bends almost immediately so he can block. He's still getting slid back, so it might not seem like it matters, but what he's doing is creating space between himself and Takeru. He needs that space in order for a slapdown to work. Otherwise, Takeru will be too close and might push him out anyway. Second, when Akiseyama's hands go up, they aren't evenly placed on Takeru's head. His right hand is more to the side with the left hand covering the back. His left foot is also back, so his stance is open to that side. This is where he wants Takerufuji to fall into the open space. but he steps back with his right foot into the opposite stance because that lets him push harder with his right hand towards his left, the side that was open. Third, once he gets Takerufuji falling in that direction, he just pulls his left foot out of the way. Because he had space to step back with his right foot, or more to the point because he made space to step back with his right foot, he knew that as long as Takeru started falling, he had room to get his leg out of the way. It's very well done. Takerufuji didn't make a major mistake here, he just got jebaited. And once again, Takeru took this as his only loss of the basho, finishing 6-1 like last time. Including his Sandanme tournament, that's 3 straight 6-1 records. He keeps doing extremely well, but something always goes wrong. Takeru finally won his first fight of a Makushita basho in September, running off a 4-0 start before this match. And this one was noticeably different than his other fights. Compared to the 2 losses we've watched, Takeru comes in much more upright. He doesn't immediately go for the push either. He allows Asa to commit to his technique, then brings his right arm around Asa's left. At that point, he does get his hands on Asa's ribs, but even then, it's just a momentary push before he reaches for the belt. This shows good patience, but unfortunately, he whiffs. This was purely a mistake on Takeru's part. Asa wiggled his hips back and out of range so he couldn't keep reaching, but this should have been an easy belt grab, and he simply missed. Now they're bent forward against each other. Once Asa Shiyu gets his left hand on Takeru's belt, notice their stances. Both of them have their right feet forward. It's balanced. Keep paying attention to their feet as we go. At this point, Takerufuji's kinda stuck with both of them stretched out, Asa clamping his left arm and Asa's left hand securely on his belt. When he tries to push inside, he can't get Asa moving, and then Asa drops his weight way down. Asa still has to do something offensive, but he has the positional advantage. If you've been watching the feet, you should have noticed they shift somewhat between right foot forward and more of an even stance, but relative to each other, they're still staying balanced. Asa's opportunity comes when Takeru tries to jam his right arm down and inside of Asa's left. Keep in mind that these guys are pushing on each other at all times. This move requires removing some of that pushing pressure, which is why guys who try it frequently end up getting slid backwards. In this case, because Takeru wants to get his right hand in, that means pulling his right foot inside back to create the necessary space. Even though it doesn't work, it looks like Takeru recovers fine, since from our angle he has a balanced stance. But look at their stances relative to each other now. Asa's is staggered with his right foot forward, creating an opening to his left. Perhaps more importantly, both of their heads are up, which means they can't see each other's feet. Asa baits Takeru by leaning down on his right side, putting serious pressure on Takeru's arm. Takeru doesn't want to just get pulled to that side, so he eases the pressure by lowering his weight on both sides. Now he's bent forward over an open space rather than his leg. Asa Shiyu takes advantage and yoinks him down. I'd bet anything that Takerufuji figured he could withstand any attempt at a throw in that direction and never considered the possibility that he'd just get pulled onto a knee like that. At this point, he was just a year into his pro sumo career. He'd been doing sumo for a long time, of course, but as with any pro sport, these guys know all the tricks, and it takes time to realize just what's possible. And give Asa Shiyu credit for being able to lock Takerufuji into a grappling match that he couldn't physically dominate. This was Takeru's next fight after the loss to Asa Shiyu, and the first fight we've seen where he faced someone on a trajectory anything like his. Hitoshi missed time early in his career with a neck injury, but there were some real expectations on him when he made it to Juryo in November. Unfortunately, he rolled his ankle on day 2 and the whole thing was a disaster, but when healthy he looks like someone who should be at least a Juryo regular. This time though, Hitoshi doesn't look great. He bounces off Takeru before he can get the belt. Without a handhold and with his opponent's momentum going backwards, Takeru starts pushing. Clearly, Hitoshi knows the book on Takeru since he gets his right hand on Takeru's head, but he's getting bounced back and takes his hand off the head to clamp Takeru's left arm instead. This is not a great position. Takeru's right hand is locked in on his belt, so he can't even twist his hips away, but he's strong enough to hit the rope, swivel his upper body, and make a desperate pushdown attempt as he's falling. And when Takeru puts his arm down to brace his fall, it looks like it works, but they called it a rematch. Takerufuji got really lucky here. His arm unquestionably touches down first. The only reason to declare this a rematch revolves around the dead body rule. If you've never heard of that, essentially it means that someone who's been pushed out but makes a move solely to prevent themselves from touching down first can still be declared the loser of the match. Usually, this is used against wrestlers who get pushed at the rope but jump to stay off the ground longer. In this case, Hitoshi not only didn't do that, he actively made a move to try and win by turning Takeru's momentum to the side. I'm not shocked they called a rematch, but declaring Hitoshi the winner would have been more than justified. So they line back up, hit each other, and this time Hitoshi refrains from reaching for the belt. Instead, he absorbs the contact, then immediately steps back and hops to the side for a pulldown. It's not amazing for Takeru to escape a last-ditch throw by his opponent, get saved by a second chance, and then charge directly into a pulldown. At this point, he's lost 4 matches out of 20 in Makushita, and 3 of them looked like some variation of this. This was Takeru's 3rd match in November after a 2-0 start. Hakuyozan is basically a big push boy. If big push doesn't work, he might try a step back pulldown, but mostly he's big push. Think of Aoyama, only smaller, not as good now, and not anywhere near as good in the past. Takerufuji should dominate him, and absolutely does at the start. He just barrels through the pushing hands and drives Hakuyozan slowly back to the Tawara. But little by little, his weight gets more forward, he becomes overextended, and Hakuyozan pushes down on his left arm to get him a touch off balance while stepping away. This doesn't necessarily have to cost Takerufuji the match, but he keeps pressing forward despite his balance failing, which is very sumo of him. Hakuyozan gets a strong push on the head, and down he goes. I'm gonna guess that he viewed Hakuyozan as a sitting duck and didn't expect the kind of resistance that would allow the slapdown to work. But this is his 5th loss in Makushita, and not only were 4 by Hatake Komi slapdown, they all looked pretty similar. Given that when he loses, this is how he loses, that would seem to indicate a weakness. And if there's a weakness, he has to expect everyone is at least ready to use it against him. I mean, other guys must have tried to take advantage of this, right? Even if it didn't work? Well, that means we should look at his wins to see what he did to defend himself. In fact, let's speedrun all of his Makushita wins. I'll note on screen when any of his opponents make a clear slapdown attempt. Yeah, that's it. 3 other guys. Of course, a slapdown won't work if your opponent makes you go in reverse too quickly, and trying to withstand Takerufuji hitting or pushing you for any length of time is pretty hard. And in his pre-Makushita tournaments, he showed he could grapple or strike. He had 11 wins by Oshidashi and 8 by Yorikiri. Thus, at least going by his results on paper, opponents couldn't necessarily rely on the arms being extended for pushes or strikes so they could play him into a slapdown. But for guys who could get his arms extended and withstand his push just long enough, they were frequently able to get him leaning too far forward and take advantage. And this, to me, is where the breakdown really starts to get interesting. We see he's got this apparent vulnerability, and his main way of getting around it has been to wreck dudes so fast they don't have a chance to use it against him. On paper, that makes it look like he would do fine once he got to Juryo, but not necessarily rate as an instant world beater. Surely there would be more guys in Juryo who could take advantage of this, right? And yet, that's not what happened. So let's go through those Makushita wins a little more carefully. We can still do it quickly, but we'll slow it down a bit so we can see what's going on. All we're looking for here is Takeru's approach. Is he using a pushing strategy, or is he trying to grapple and control his opponent out? Was it really just 3 guys who tried the slapdown and 20 others who lost to him without ever giving it a thought? First, as a quick reminder, here's that Makushita debut again. Takeru pushes and pushes, never goes for the belt. He loses. Now we get to the rest of the basho. Next match, his opponent blocks his right arm from getting in, but his left is around the back for control. That's a grapple. Here, the right hand gets in, left around the back, then both around the back. Grapple. Left hand in, right around the back. Left hand's blocked, so he swings it around for the belt. Another grapple. After initial contract, he gets hold of Kazuto's arms. He wants to get inside, but Kazuto's high push doesn't allow it, so Takeru just starts shoving. He pushed here, but that wasn't his initial intention. He wanted to grapple. Initially, they push off each other, but at the first opportunity, Takeru dives inside for the belt. Grapple. Now this one is just a straight push out, but it's the first time since that opening loss that he really goes for a push. So that's kinda interesting, right? He gets burned using a push strategy, so he switches tactics to getting inside and just rides that grappling style to the end of the basho. The next tournament in July started off the same way, with that first match loss to a Kiseyama's pushdown. How'd he react to that? Takeru does a quick slap on the tachi, which is a very rare tactic for him. Then his hands come low, and it looks like he's trying to control Tsurubayashi's left arm because he makes no attempt at a push on that side. Tsuru has Takeru's left arm clamped, which does give him some ability to push. They hand fight on Takeru's right, but by the time Takeru is able to get his hand in any sort of usable position, he's already halfway to pushing Tsuru out, so he just goes with it. This was probably an intent to grapple, but since Takeru used an unusual start with a slap and then got sloppy afterwards, it's not entirely clear. Boom! Push out. Maybe it was the opponent, maybe a decision not to worry about the slapdown, but he wasn't scared of the slapdown this time. The approach is a little hard to tell here. Takeru's hands are in a low push position, and it looks like he wants to get his hands on Dewa Noryu's ribs, but he gets clamped on the left and blocked on the right. He could have been reaching for the grapple and been blocked in the same way though. Keep that in mind. The fact he brings his arms in at a similar angle whether he wants to push or grapple makes him hard to read, but also means opponents should know where his arms will be on the tachi. In any case, Dewa's leaning forward enough to keep from getting pushed back, so Takeru lifts the left arm to get himself inside and takes the fight from there. We'll call this an inconclusive approach. This is probably a grapple attempt, especially because Miyagi is so much smaller. But Miyagi hits his right arm and shoulder so that it's impossible to try and grapple on that side, and Miyagi shoots back so fast that trying to control him around the left wasn't happening either. Here, it's worth noting that when Takeru hits the ribs, it might be a sign he's initially thinking push, but he gets the belt right away when it's available. Hitting the opponent to hold them up and then going for the belt is pretty normal. This is an intended grapple. Now here's one of the obvious Hatake Komi attempts. Takeru's hands come in low, but look, Hatsuyama hits him high and forces him into a brief push exchange, after which Takeru dives in again. This is definitely a grappling attempt, but Hatsuyama's still got his arms up, forcing distance between them, then uses that distance to pull down on Takeru's arms and try dragging him into a slapdown. Takeru was able to get inside enough to stay centered on Hatsuyama's chest and run him out, but Hatsuyama did exactly what he was trying to do. Here's the key takeaway. All 4 times Takeru lost by slapdown, his opponent sidestepped to get out of the way. Hakuyozan was the only one he was able to turn and follow, but Hakuyozan pushed his head down before he was able to really focus his power in the new direction. Hatsuyama here didn't start the slapdown until after he pivoted away, which meant the slapdown attempt happened going more or less straight backwards and he ran out of real estate. At this level at least, all evidence says Takeru brings too much force to just back up and let him fall in front of you. You have to get out of the way and give him space to fall into. Now, only one guy made a clear attempt at a Hatake Komi, but if you look back at the rest of this basho, it's apparent every opponent except maybe Oshoumi appeared to have this same idea of stopping Takeru from getting his hands in. They may have done it by blocking the arms or pushing him away, but regardless, if he only seems to lose to slapdowns, this type of strategy makes a lot of sense. You can't let him get inside and grapple, and keeping him at a distance allows for a better slapdown attempt if he gets overextended. He just made it too hard for any of them to pull it off. This is one of the reasons watching the tape is useful. If you just go by the listed Kimarite, the winning techniques, it doesn't look like Takeru was trying to grapple that much in July since he had 4 push-out wins and only 2 Yori-Kiris. But we can see he consistently tried to get inside. His opponents just didn't make it easy and forced him to switch tactics, and he's such a force that it largely wasn't an issue. Most intriguing to me, watching his wins, was the vast difference between the bottom of the division, where they seemed helpless to stop him from getting inside, and this mid-level, where they at least tried to defend themselves even if it didn't ultimately work. In September, he was at Makushita 6. This is the first time in Makushita that Takeru won his first match in a basho. They both reach for the belt, but Kamito's left is on the outside and pinches Takeru's right arm. Takeru swings the arm around, gets his hands on Kamito's ribs, and when Kamito goes fully defensive, Takeru has no reason to do anything other than push since he's just overpowering Kamito in this position. It looked like an initial attempt to grapple, but the transition to the push was very smooth. This is a straight grapple. Kiryuko gets his arms high and wide. I don't think I've ever seen this exact opening, and I'm not sure what he was trying to do. What he definitely wasn't doing was defending himself. He slides back so fast that some of Takeru's attack turns into a push, but this is purely an intent to grapple. And here we have pretty much pure push. Tochi Musashi reaches down and in and doesn't do much in the way of blocking the right arm. Takeru could get in on the belt or around the back, but that never appears to be the plan. Takeru gets his right arm pinched initially here as Tochi Kamiyama tries to get an angle on him, but he fights his way inside. He wants the grapple and it takes some effort, but he gets it. Takeru lost the two after that and hanked Yuma in his final match, so these four are the relevant ones. Only against Tochi Musashi did he intend to attack with a push. It was easy enough for him to get into the push against Kamito, even though it didn't look like his initial intent, and the other two were grapples start to finish. And he attacked with a grapple in both of his losses, although in the rematch with Hitoshi he faked the belt grab before going with a push. Also, consider the difference in the mid-division opponents versus these ones near the top of the division. Most of the mid-level guys took an approach that prioritized defending against Takeru's grapple. Here, his opponents were more focused on getting their own attack going. None of them actively defended at the start except for Hitoshi in the rematch. Because the Hatakekomi is essentially a way of winning defensively, searching for an attack will generally make it harder to set up. And because Sumo very much rewards offense, the higher you go in rank, the more you see guys look for their own line of attack rather than focus on defending. Is that foreshadowing? It could be foreshadowing. Here's his last Makushita tournament from November. This was Takeru's first career rematch against Oshoumi. The first time he hit Oshoumi and immediately grappled. This time he hits him in the center of the chest and Oshoumi clamps down, which means Takeru would need to really pull his hand free and let off the attack, or just keep pushing. The push is working, so he sticks with it. Oshoumi almost pulls off a miracle at the end like Hitoshi did, but this time Takeru remembers to keep his arm up so he doesn't touch down first. Note how Oshoumi gets defensive very quickly here, unlike in their first match. It's almost like he realized his attack is not going to be as strong as Takeru's. Here, Chiyo Sakai hits Takeru, then immediately backs off and tries to get his hands up. Takeru keeps shoving and, importantly, flings Chiyo's arms up in a way to keep them from attacking his head. Even so, Chiyo reacts by pushing on the arms, but he's too close to the edge and goes out before that can do anything. He did try to set up a slapdown, but he wasn't able to sidestep and create space for Takeru to fall into. This is the second obvious Hatakekomi attempt. Takeru gets in on the Tachiai and pushes again. There's no attempt to grapple, he's keeping his arms in to limit the chances he gets overextended, but this is straight up bulldozer mode. And Fukai correctly hits his arms right away, then aims for a pull down, but yet again Takeru's got his opponent moving backwards way too fast for this to work. Bear in mind, this is right after Hakuyozan beat him. That fight didn't go at all the way he wanted, but this time he's not letting a loss alter his approach. And here's Hatakekomi number 3. Sushi Minata actually pops Takeru on the Tachiai and gets him sliding backwards. This is not a thing that ever happens, so props on being able to do that. After this start, Takeru has all the reason in the world to parry or otherwise control the arms and get inside for a grapple, but he doesn't. He dives back in with his hands ready to hit Sushi Minata's ribs, and Sushi's chop down on Takeru's forearms does nothing. All Takeru has to do is grab him and shove, and yet Sushi's still able to get enough space for Takeru to get extended and parallel to the ground by the time Sushi steps out. A bit of an all-in play from Takeru here in a situation where it probably wasn't necessary, but it worked. Like Sushi Minata, Chiyono Umi's able to get Takeru moving back. It's kinda wild seeing it twice in a row when it so rarely happens otherwise. Anyway, Chiyo wants to get into a smacking war, and yet again it's probably in Takeru's best interest to get inside of those arms and grapple. Instead, he accepts the fight at range. That lasts about 4 seconds, an eternity in sumo time. Then Chiyo gets his weight forward to prevent himself from being pushed backward any further, and Takeru adjusts nicely to slap him down. One more time, pure pushing from Takeru. Hitoshi was fighting on a bad ankle, so it made even more sense here, but we can see this wasn't a change of strategy for this opponent. This is what he was going for the whole tournament. It really does take going through all 4 of his Makushita bashos to see it, but Takeru has 2 clearly different but effective methods of wrestling. He can hit and push and get it done that way, but he can also get inside and control his opponent. He frequently refrains from bothering with the belt, relying instead on the quicker method of getting his forearms around his opponent's torso and driving with his legs, but as we've discussed in other breakdowns, this still works if you can maintain the hold. It's not uncommon for some wrestlers to push with one arm and make sure they have the other around an opponent's side so they can't escape that way. If you're able to move someone effectively with your arms on both sides of them, it's nearly impossible to defend against. In addition, when he left Makushita and got into Juryo, The question was not just which approach he'd use, but how opponents would look to defend themselves and how long it would take for him to meet wrestlers who could physically stand up against him. Remember, he'd whooped on a few guys who've seen time in Juryo, but the only Juryo regular he faced was Hakuyozan, and Hakuyozan was able to fend him off better than just about anyone else. Considering Hakuyozan's big but not the biggest, strong but not the strongest, and definitely not the best athlete in the division, it stood to reason he'd be more tested in Juryo. We know that's not how it went, but why? What happened that made this guy who was never able to run the table in Division 3 nearly do it in Division 2? Hakuyozan already played him once, so Takeru's not messing with him this time. He gets in, clamps his arms around Hakuyozan's body, and just drives. Hakuyozan gets his left arm around Takeru's right, but it doesn't do anything useful. This isn't really anything to go on. We saw that he adjusted tactics in his second match against Oshiumi, and he does the same here. This should be the first real test. Daishoho's a marginal Makuuchi guy and just real big. Takeru launches himself in and gets his arms inside while Daishoho clamps. Looking at this from the future, we know he's strong enough to handle this type of fight, but at the time Daishoho probably had the greatest ability to resist such a push of anyone he'd fought. So it was pretty impressive that he didn't have much problem getting Daishoho moving backwards and maintaining full control until he was out. Aka was quicker off the jump and he hits Takeru's upper arms. This forces Takeru into more of a pushing fight since he's blocked off from any attempt at a grapple right away. But once he gets the better of that, he gets his hands low. He wants that belt. If he wanted a pushing fight, Akawa's face and chest are right there. Akawa blocks his right arm while clamping with his left, and because it's Akawa, goes for a Kakanage. His feet get crossed though and lead to a terrible setup which Takeru easily powers through. That's 3 straight matches where Takeru had clear intentions of getting in and grappling. Day 4, he hits Hidenoumi so hard that Hidenoumi slides back and he has to work a bit to get the belt. But that's obviously his goal and he succeeds in getting there. Once again, Takeru launches in and immediately gets his left arm under Asakoryu's for control and pushes. It might have been described as a battle of attrition if it was, longer. This one makes more sense because of the size difference, but yet again, inside grapple, control, shove. 6 fights into his Juryo career, Takeru finally meets someone who gets his arms positioned where Takeru can't get to his belt. In this case, Shiden pushes so hard that it lets Takeru adjust by stepping away and pushing down on his arms to knock him over. But Shiden had the right idea and he did force Takeru to switch off of his normal tactics. Like Asakoryu, Yuma's on the smaller side, so Takeru ends up blasting him back. Even so, he doesn't try to turn it into a push-out. He works his way in on the belt and doesn't mind that he has to swing Yuma around and take him all the way to the other side of the ring. Takeru pushes Shishi right away, but remember, hitting to set up the grapple is normal. It's just that sometimes when Takeru hits, guys fly back. So note that his next move is to control Shishi's arm. He's still not looking to use a real Oshi pushing attack. He wants control. This one goes a bit differently, but it's Oshiumi who becomes the first guy Takeru's fought 3 times. Takeru again hits and pushes, but then keeps his arms outside without reaching in for the belt or another form of grapple. This might have been game planned because Team Izagahama is better than most at that, or it could have been an adjustment to feeling Oshiumi planting on the Tawara and his weight coming way forward. Regardless, instead of attacking for a win, Takeru uses Oshiumi's lean against him and hits a slapdown. Now we get to where the basho took a downturn. Takeru hits Roga on the tachiai and Roga goes backwards because everyone goes backwards. His hands are inside, which could be either an intent to push or to get inside of Roga's arms for a grapple. We discussed that. But from the start, Roga moves to his left and pushes Takeru's right arm in. After initial contact, he adds the pushdown with the right hand to keep Takeru's momentum from ever coming directly at him. Takeru comes in so hot that he can't even plant his feet to try and stop his momentum until Roga's at a 90-degree angle to him, at which point Roga pushes his arm to really get him flying out. It's not a pull-down win, but the same concept was used at a higher tactical level, being combined with the intent to get all the way around Takeru rather than just step out of the way and let him fall. More importantly, Takeru pretty much always keeps his hands low and in whether he plans to push or grapple, and Roga was able to use that one predictable piece of Takeru's opening and turn it into a winning strategy. This is the kind of new tactic that often turns into a blueprint for how to have a better chance against someone, especially someone with a lot of talent but not a lot of pro experience. Did Kitanawaka follow that blueprint the next day? No, not at all. But he did defend himself. First, he blocked Takeru from getting to the belt, just like we saw the Makushita guys doing. After they push each other away, or more like they both push but only Kitanawaka slides away, he lowers his shoulder and Takeru definitely hits him harder than he hits Takeru. But it's a setup. It's not going to work for him to mirror shoulder charges again, so he fakes it and gets Takeru to completely bite and dive into open space. It was very clever, but here's what I think is more worth noticing. After 11 days, only 3 guys came into their fights with Takerufuji showing an intent to defend. Shiden and Kitanawaka did it with a basic block, whereas Roga showed an offensive approach but used that to mask a planned counterattack. 2 of those 3 guys won, and the third threw Takeru further off of his intended game plan than anyone else. Now it's Kageyaki's turn, because at this point there was hardly anyone who could pretend to be a viable option. And even though Kageyaki's lost a couple of steps from his heyday, this is a guy who will absolutely hit a dude and slap him down, so it's a good time for Takeru to get back to working inside and not open himself up to that tactic. So what does he do? He gets into an absolute shoving war with the veteran. This lasted long enough that if Kageyaki wanted to, and timed it well enough, he absolutely could have gone for a slapdown and at least made it scary for Takeru's fans. That's easy to say after the fact and watching in slow-mo, of course, but even though Takeru wound up inside, it's really because the flow of the pushing battle led him there. It wasn't his initial intent. And for all his dominance, if it looks like anything might cause a fight to turn on a dime against him, it's trying to become an Oshi monster. His next 2 fights were against Tenshoho, whose pretensions at being Juryo level were absolutely shattered in this basho, and Chiyo Sakai, who already faced Takeru once and clearly wanted no part of him again. It's easy to overlook these fights because the opponents didn't put up any sort of challenge, but Takeru was in full push mode in these as well. And then finally there's Toki Hayate. It's hard to say for sure what Takeru's intention was, since Toki went outside of his left arm and made it extremely difficult to attempt to grapple in the short time the match lasted. But he was obviously ready to just push, unlike against Yuma, where he immediately got his arm outside and made his grappling intentions clear. So 13-2 in Juryo, fantastic tournament, not many guys who could stand with him. Now let's recall what we've seen of his tactics so far. May 2023, tried pushing his first opponent, lost, went straight grappling almost the whole rest of the way. July, tried pushing his first opponent, lost, mainly went grappling, although his opponents did more to defend against him getting inside. September, finally won his first few, mostly with grappling, lost a couple, but overall it was the clearest blend of approaches. In November though, it was all pushing. Even when that strategy fell short against Hakuyozan, he stuck to it. Then in January, in Juryo, he grappled or attempted to every single match until Roga got the better of him, then got baited/forced into a pushing match with Kitanawaka, and even though that didn't work either, he stuck with pushing the rest of the way. It seems at this point like he's comfortable fighting either way, but pushing is a little bit more of a style he's happy to fall back on, even though it might be a little more vulnerable to defensive tactics. Equally important, as we're seeing, is the matter of his opponent's defense. Takeru is hard to deal with when he's pushing, even harder to deal with when he's grappling, and almost nobody seems able to match him on a purely physical level. The Makushita guys who defended against him on the Tachiai broadly gave him the most tactical trouble, even if they couldn't withstand his physicality. They at least made him switch from his intended strategy to a different one. Bigger, stronger, and better wrestlers should be able to take advantage of that idea. But only 3 of Takeru's 15 Juryo opponents bothered to try, and again, it was in those 3 fights where he took both of his losses. In March, one of the questions was if he could remain as physically dominant in the top division, because it was easy to watch his fights and declare he simply ran through guys. I'm as guilty of that as anyone. But now that we see he's been comfortable performing at a high level in these 2 very different styles for a while, let's see if, number 1, he had to make good use of that tactical flexibility, or if he was really able to just run through almost everybody, and number 2, if the Makuuchi guys took a lesson from what happened in Juryo and at least tried more defensive approaches. Takeru starts off with his hands fairly high, which is unusual relative to what we've seen from him up to this point. He pushes off, uses that space to get his right arm outside and both hands to Daiamami's ribs, then allows Daiamami closer so he can get the belt. Daiamami here is sort of like Daishoho in Juryo, not on Takeru's level as an athlete, but big and strong on a level that creates its own problems. And in fact, as Takeru pulls up on the belt to get him moving, Daiamami holds his ground in a way very few guys have been able to so far. In fact, he's able to pull up on his left side to get Takeru's arm in the air and push him back. He gets his right hand in to improve his grapple, but this puts Takeru outside of that arm, and Takeru responds brilliantly, releasing the belt and stepping off with a head push to get Daiamami storming past him. Not only that, but he keeps his fingers hooked under the belt long enough to prevent himself from losing much ground, so he's able to charge and blast Daiamami like a linebacker well before Daiamami can turn around and defend himself. No, Daiamami's not the baddest dude in the division, but dealing with a level of resistance he really hasn't seen in a pro match and turning it around so easily is a sign of good preparation. Again, Takeru pushes at the start, although he's back to coming in relatively low. But even though it looks like this develops into an exchange of strikes, Endo's the only one trying to hit his opponent. Takeru, on the other hand, parries up on Endo's left, up on Endo's right, then across on Endo's left to get himself inside for the grapple. Again, this is excellent stuff. Sumo is a very offense-oriented sport, but he's going purely defensive because a push fight isn't in the game plan, and he's able to use that defense confidently and effectively. The types of strikes Endo throws here are rhythmic, so they can be defended if you have the timing, but learning that timing is hard. Takeru's already got it down though. From there, he gets inside, grabs the belt, clamps Endo's left arm high, and just stays under control. Takeru is the better athlete, so even when Endo uses tricks like leaning way down to pressure Takeru's left arm and snapping his hip to break the grip, all Takeru has to do is hang on and stay with him. Henka! The other time he did it was when he lost those 2 straight matches in Makushita. Maybe he just does it when he's mad or when he's trying to prove a point. Once again, Takeru uses his normal Tachi-ai, bringing his hands in low, and Myogiryu is the first Makuuchi opponent to block them. Takeru pushes, but Myogiryu pushes back on the arms, so continuing to shove is really Takeru's only option at the moment. But it's working, so that's okay, right? Well, Myogiryu braces on the Tawara and gets way forward, so Takeru can't push him out. And as soon as one good push doesn't work, Takeru steps back and slaps down on Myogiryu's arms. Straightforward adjustment, but how many guys do you see just keep shoving and not change gears this quickly? Myogiryu's crafty though, so once he comes off the rope and gets Takeru leaning forward, he backpedals and tries a slapdown. He doesn't get a sidestep in though, so Takeru's able to keep his feet long enough to get the win. Like we said with the Roga fight in Juryo, sometimes fights create blueprints for how to beat a guy. And while the tape up to this point has already shown what to do, which is almost certainly why Myogiryu tried this strategy, maybe seeing it from a top division guy is what it'll take to get others to do it. Toki Hayate comes up from Juryo for day 5 and there just isn't much he can do. He's not that big, but he doesn't use a super high mobility style, which means there's effectively nothing he can do face up against Takeru. Takeru hits Churanaumi on the Tachi-ai and launches him back. If you think that's an overstatement, look. Churanaumi's left foot stepped on his line at the Tachi-ai, and with one shot he's a third of the way to the edge. Takeru's hand placement shows he's looking to grapple, but it's unnecessary. 6 days in, let's point something out. The only one of Takeru's opponents who fought defensively was Myogiryu. Daiamami reached in, Endo went Oshi, Roga's left hand was in a low attacking position, Toki Hayate reached in even though that was a patently insane strategy in this matchup, and Takeru's push blocked Churanaumi's low reach in. Like I said earlier, Sumo rewards offense, and the higher you go the more guys will look for their own attack, but when you're this physically overmatched, it's really hard for that to work. So in a very real way, even though this is the top division, almost all of these guys are just walking into Takerufuji being a force of nature. Shonanaumi was the first opponent who looked like he could give Takeru a problem. He's bigger, he can withstand good offense, and he's unusually proficient at defensive fighting for a guy his size. In fact, he's pretty good at step-back slapdowns. But he doesn't block on the Tachi-ai, instead engaging in an immediate grapple with Takeru, who really likes grappling big guys and controlling their movement. As he slides back, he gets his hips swiveling like he's gonna turn and throw right away. The swivel means he doesn't drop his weight and try to stay put, and it's an easy Yorikiri win. On one hand, I don't want to blame guys for losing to Takeru in their first match because he's just built different and it's hard to understand what's necessary to deal with that until you've dealt with it. On the other hand, sometimes it's like, y'all need to watch some tape because I don't know what you think you're gonna accomplish with this strategy. Here's an example of someone who seems to have a plan that gets busted in half when they actually get in there. Takeru buries his head into Ryuden's shoulder on the Tachi-ai and Ryuden's right hand is just flailing. He pretty obviously wanted to get his right arm around Takeru's left and take the belt, but Takeru whacked him so hard he didn't even come close, and now he's trying to figure out what to do. Chalk this up to a combination of Takeru being diesel and strong prep. If you go back through his other fights, you'll see that blasting his head into an opponent's shoulder is not a normal tactic he uses. Part of it is that Ryuden reached, which brought his shoulder into Takeru's head, but even so, it's not a common tactic of Takeru's that Ryuden blundered into. It's difficult to believe that nobody at the stable, be it Coach Izagahama, Takerufuji, whoever, told him that this was something that would work against Ryuden. And if he did get that advice, it means he listens. In any case, Ryuden held his ground, but he was still scrambling with his hands as he pivoted away to buy time. And since he wasn't applying any offense, Takeru had time to find control of Ryuden's right arm, then get the belt, and after that it was over. The fact Takeru took a few seconds in a series of moves to get the belt is potentially a point of improvement, since at the highest levels guys will snap their techniques into place immediately, and it's better not to get into the habit of taking things too slowly against lesser challengers just because you can. But he did control this one all the way through, so it's hard to criticize him very much. Anyone who tends to doubt newcomers might have looked at this match with Abi as Takeru's first real test. And going by what we've seen here, there would be good reason for that. Takeru's biggest issue have come against guys who can hold him off and then slap him down, and if Abi can't get his opponent going backwards, that's his backup calling card. And maybe, theoretically, it could have worked, but Abi totally screws this up. If you want to set up a Hatake Komi, you gotta get your opponent's upper body, especially his head, pushed back so it can snap forward like a rubber band. Otherwise, you're relying on him getting too far forward on his own. And when Abi doesn't get any backwards push despite going for the head, he immediately pushes down on Takeru's head and arm with his left and right hands respectively. And it does get Takeru a little off balance, but it's not nearly enough. Takeru clearly knew what was coming, because everyone does, and just blew through it. Abi needed to commit to attempting to push a little bit longer. We saw Takeru's parries against Endo, so maybe it was doomed regardless of the specifics, but this was never going to work. Now we're 9 fights in and Takeru's still hardly taken a step wrong. He's overwhelming enough that against most guys, he just has to stay in control and not screw it up, and he's doing it. After watching Takeru blast through everyone for 9 days, Onosato looked like the first person who could actually body him up. Of course, Onosato only has a little more high-level experience than Takeru, and even less experience as a pro overall, so this was a much more equivalent matchup on paper than the rest. And on the Tachiai, they meet chest to chest with neither one going anywhere. Takeru gets his right hand in chasing the belt, but Onosato clearly wants that hand inside so he can clamp the arm. On top of that, although we can't see it, Onosato has the belt on the opposite side. That's theoretically an advantage, but really, this is an even position. Then Onosato makes his move. He pivots back and pushes Takeru's hand away to open up that side as much as he can. Takeru's shin gets parallel to the ground, so he's getting off balanced by this move, but he's able to keep driving forward, and more importantly, he's got that left arm on Onosato's ribs. That keeps Onosato from getting all the way outside and out of Takeru's path, so Onosato essentially pulls Takeru in and Takeru gets the force out. It wasn't really a bad plan from Onosato and his team. If you hold the belt, you necessarily can't dislodge the opponent's arm from your ribs. You just have to pivot and throw hard enough that he can't maintain that position. It's yet another example, most likely, of something that can work in theory, but you only realize it's not going to work on Takerufuji when you try it. I don't expect Onosato to attempt this when they meet again though. He's one of the few guys who should be able to actually battle Takeru. This was the first fight where I thought Takeru was an actual underdog, and Kota Nowaka got him in some trouble. First, Takeru bends in and reaches for the left, and Koto dips his hips back at the perfect time to make Takeru whiff. That miss gets him overextended, which allows Koto to press that arm in and tip him up on that side. Takeru responds with a nice athletic move, hopping to the side on his right foot to evade Koto's charge, but this is the first time in all these many matches we've seen where he has to make a move that gets him in any way out of control. In this case, he hops and reaches for the belt with his right hand, but he misses because he gets too far away. This sort of thing happens all the time. Guys defend themselves from some sort of attack, but they're out of position for a counterattack, or it makes the wrestlers disengage entirely. But Takeru has maintained a good position against everyone up till this point. And if you go back over the entirety of this breakdown, the only times he gets out of control are when he overextends on offense. Having this occur on defense simply hasn't happened. Because Koto rushes in so hard, Takeru's evasion does make him miss and reset. When they re-engage, Koto pushes in, but Takeru defends like he did against Endo, parrying the left hand up. That's the only one he needs this time. He pushes in with the left hand, Koto pushes down on it, and probably much to Koto's surprise, he ends up going backwards. He does what he can, opening his stance and wrapping his left arm over Takeru's right to attempt some kind of throw, but he hasn't set it up at all because he didn't expect to be in this position. Takeru catches him on one foot and bounces him out. The fact Koto wasn't prepared to need that throw shouldn't be surprising. Takeru's blown through just about everyone, but Kota Nowaka is different. He had to have gone into this match thinking he was gonna be the guy who stopped the train, the guy who could keep Takeru from asserting his will, and at the start that's exactly what happened. But then Takeru started pushing him with one hand. If you're Kota Nowaka, how can you expect that to even be possible? From the perspective of observing Takerufuji though, this was a fight that showed why he's not going to go 12-13 wins every time out even when healthy. There are guys like Koto who can cause him trouble and will finish the job given more chances to see him. But still, this win was very impressive. If it was difficult or impossible for everyone to understand what they were dealing with before they got in there with Takeru, it was always possible for the same thing to happen to him. Enter the nephew. Hoshoryu loves his throws, and no doubt Takeru was well prepared for the possibility. He charged, and when Hoshoryu turned, he kept hold and followed. He even kept Hoshoryu at enough of a distance that Hoshoryu couldn't get his belt. But planting the foot, getting the arm, and instantly kicking Takeru's leg out for a throw is a Hoshoryu special, and he uses it to still get the win. Let's not understate how hard that is to do. We just saw Kota Nowaka try essentially the same thing and he didn't come close to making it work. Hoshoryu planned for a throw, yes, but he obviously wanted the belt, and snapping into a different throw so quickly, even if it was a planned backup maneuver, is just not something Takeru's likely to see from anyone else. Some guys might be able to hit it as a one-off, but Hoshoryu's the only one where you have to consider the possibility every time. After all, Onosato saw this exact type of throw from Hoshoryu in January, knew it could happen, and made Hoshoryu's life harder in March, but in the end still lost to another on-the-spot throw. Hoshoryu is liable to keep doing this to anyone as long as they haven't shown they can stop it. So we'll see if Takerufuji can adjust going forward. Waka, bless his heart, had absolutely no chance here. When you hear someone say they're just gonna go out and do their type of sumo, Wakamoto Haru is exactly that kind of guy. And Takeru is simply too big, too strong, and too controlled for Waka to walk into a grapple with him and find a way to win. He's very good at those last-ditch rope throws, so I wouldn't be shocked if he beats Takeru with one or two of those over time, but by and large, all that magical grip strength of his won't mean much once Takeru's locked in. There's not much to say here. It's Takeru doing the same thing he's done to a bunch of others, only now he's doing it to a Sekiwake. And now for the unfortunate, possibly career-altering moment of Takerufuji's Makuuchi debut. Asanoyama looked like a tough matchup, but given how Takeru had performed up to this point, it was hard to see what Asanoyama brought to the table that was special enough to succeed where even Kota Nowaka had failed. As it turns out, what he brought was a big old body and no plan of moving backwards. Takeru charges, and Asanoyama basically stands up and takes it. It would not have been a surprise if Asanoyama was as wrong as everyone else who thought they could do this and got shot backwards, but he barely moved and instantly clamped Takeru's right arm above the elbow. Moreover, he timed his lift on the right side with the moment Takeru picked his left foot up to step forward, which bounced him off the ground and immediately turned the momentum in Asanoyama's favor. From there, he essentially did to Takeru what Takeru does to everyone else. Takeru is never in this position where his opponent is pressing and he needs to get his feet set and his weight down. So he swings his hips, keeps his feet moving and tries to counter, but Asanoyama's completely locked in. As long as he doesn't relinquish his hold and keeps moving forward, Takeru can't stop himself from being pushed out. Asanoyama was able to do this because 1. He's another guy who can body Takeru for real, 2. He was determined to stand his ground, and 3. He knew that when a guy drives forward, he can use the piston-like timing of his legs to get him off balance. If you watch the Onosato breakdown, this is exactly what Koto Shoho did to him. Long term, this may be the biggest thing Takeru needs to adapt to. Constant leg churning pressure against someone who can hang in there will open him up to all sorts of moves, and when your success comes from that powerful drive, whether you're pushing or controlling the opponent, it's a hard thing to do without exposing yourself to unnecessary vulnerabilities. By the way, the ankle had nothing to do with this loss. He sprained it when he didn't step cleanly off the dohyo and his foot got stretched way up. That's why some of us initially thought it was an Achilles injury. The build up to this last fight was insane given Takeru's ankle and the state of the Yusho race, but from a breakdown perspective it's somewhat anticlimactic. It starts out the way you'd expect, with Gonoyama getting in to push and test Takeru's ankle. This is what he should do. It's the only thing he should do. Make Takeru show the ability to either push or be mobile on that ankle. Instead, he can't quite get Takeru moving, so he reaches in for the belt. Now, if you don't know anything about Gonoyama, that might seem reasonable enough, but he is, to put it kindly, not a good belt fighter. I'm sure he's working on it, but you're fighting a guy who's mauled everyone in close except Asanoyama, and Asanoyama is a much more experienced belt fighter who executed his strategy perfectly. I'm not saying Takeru's easy to move even on one leg, but in Gonoyama's position, the only plausible option is to get after him and test what he can do. Now, this is turning into more of a Gonoyama breakdown, but that's kinda why it's anticlimactic. Takeru has all the time he needs to find his footing, secure the right hand on the belt, actually lose the grip to Gonoyama forcing his arm up too far while bracing on the Tawara, and then dragging the big guy around until Gonoyama no longer has any idea what to do and becomes a sitting duck. If you want a takeaway about Takeru specifically, especially since this is his one fight on a bad ankle and the ankle doesn't seem to have healed fully going into May, watch how his right foot keeps slipping and he has to take time to set his feet. Guys' feet slip a lot, so it may not mean anything, but if the tape on his foot is hurting his traction, someone who pays attention may be able to make use of that. Now that we've seen 6 bashos worth of Takerufuji's fights, let's return to the questions we asked at the start of the breakdown. Number 1. How did he do it? How did he somehow look more dominant as he fought better opposition? The main factor, of course, is that he's absolutely yoked. He's got a rare level of brawn even for this sport, he's 25 so he's near the height of his physical powers, and he doesn't have a career of injuries holding him back. When our Muay Thai coach talks about checking kicks, he likes to say, I kick you, I hurt you, you kick me, I hurt you. The idea is your leg is more conditioned than your opponent's, so it hurts when you kick them, but it also hurts when they kick into your block. That's kind of what Takerufuji brings to the table. He hits you, you go back, but if you hit him, you're still probably going back. This makes him difficult to beat, but the 3rd division guys showed it wasn't impossible. And that points to the other factor, too much sumo brain getting in the way. The higher you go in rank, the more you have to be able to successfully attack, but that means when a superior athlete comes along, you're gonna have a hell of a time winning if you don't adjust. And the only guy in the top division who took a really proper defensive approach was Myogiryu, whose body is reaching its limit and who will not hesitate to take whatever looks like the most effective approach against an opponent. Granted, the whole top division doesn't need to do this. For one, there are strategies which live in more of a gray area between offense and defense. Baiting someone into charging into a throw, for example, is using defense to set up a counterattack, which Hoshoryu did and Onosato tried. And I wouldn't expect Kotonowaka, Asanoyama, or Gonoyama to be overly defensive since they have the size and power to hang with Takerufuji. But that still leaves 9 other guys who would have been well served crafting a strategy that kept Takeru at bay long enough to find a winning technique, and at this level, guys and their coaches need to be able to recognize when a brawl is a losing proposition and adjust accordingly. Hardly anyone did. In fact, watching Onosato, one of the few who should be able to stand in against Takeru, still try and be smart and use Takeru's dieselness against him, just put the failings of everyone else into pretty stark relief. Number 2. Should we have expected him to contend for the Makuuchi Yusho whether or not he won? Now that we're looking at most of his career in detail, the answer seems to be yes. And if you think of contending as simply being within a couple wins of the lead, then the answer was definitely yes. He was obviously capable of running over the bottom of the division and staying in the hunt for most of the basho at a minimum. But this level of performance? This is genuinely a difficult question to answer. Of course, we could see what he was capable of on the attack, but the trick to succeeding in the top division is facing better guys who can pose more questions and still finding the answers. I think most of us assume, reasonably so, that even if it's not clear exactly who's going to pose those questions, they will come. But with Takerufuji, they didn't. They simply didn't. Myogiryu and Onosato were the only ones who tried to show any sort of cleverness in fighting Takeru. As it turned out, Myogiryu just can't hang with him, and Onosato had to reach for a strategy that's not in his normal bag of tricks, so that didn't work either. But more guys should have been trying a wider array of tactics. And to be clear, I'm not saying those tactics necessarily need to start with defense. It's probably the smart approach in most cases, but if, for example, Takeru fought Ura and Ura ducked in on the Tachiai to try an instant Ashitori, that's also trying something clever. I think we'll slowly see that wider array of ideas come into game plans against Takeru as time goes on, so don't be surprised if he continues to be successful but suddenly doesn't look like he's gonna be Yokozuna in May of 2025. But it's well past time all sumo wrestlers and their coaches sit down, analyze tape, and find approaches beyond go fight your fight and see what happens against unfamiliar opponents. And that is the Takerufuji breakdown. Managed to keep this one under an hour, so hooray! Did you learn anything from this? What was it? Let me know in the comments. Engagement is always good for YouTube channels, but it's also helpful for me to know what parts of these breakdowns are most effective for all of you. Other than that, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.